questions are fundamental to my creative process. The work always begins with a question that I then attempt to answer by making the work. In 1969, I had just gotten my first camera. What to do with this camera? How does one look at and think about the world through the rectangular space of the frame? What is your subject going to be? What are you going to make photographs of? I think a lot of times, certainly within marginalized communities, photography has been used as a kind of passport, a way to enter the lives of someone who in some way or another is living a life that's very different from the life of the photographer. And then those photographs are shown to an audience whose lives are very different from the lives of the people in the photograph. And it tends to reinscribe this whole othering of certain subjects in certain communities. So I wanted to address that. When I started photographing in Harlem, one of the things that I quickly realized was that this was not just about picture making. African Americans have been visualized photographically through a lens of violence, drug addiction, that didn't quite line up with the Harlem that I knew from the experience of my mother and father and family members who lived there. What I was interested in was showing the Black subject in Harlem in a way that implied a kind of deep interiority. That this was a deep, full, engaging person momentarily allow me into their lives in order to make a photograph. Picturing them in a way that gave them a sense of enhanced presence, reshaping the way people see and think about a particular piece of the world. I never believed that the photograph conveys dignity. I think people inherently have their own dignity. In my portraits, there's always this direction of the subject's gaze to the camera. There was a moment in history when Black people were not permitted to look white people in the eyes. There could be a tragic or fatal outcome from directing your gaze at the wrong person. So one of the things that I wanted to do in that work was to create a space where the Black subjects could direct their gaze at the viewer. When you read about these places, they talk about the beauty of the landscape, the magnificence of the main house. And they don't talk about the sheer horror that this whole thing rested on. There's a profound absence within our society around the history that, of course, resonates even now around Black trauma. The way that trauma has very long and deep history that is not always visualized. What kind of work can one make about something that happened decades ago? when I was 11 years old. My mother and father brought a book home called The Movement. It was a book of photographs of and about the civil rights movement. There were a number of really horrific photographs in that book, including a few lynching photographs. The photograph that seared itself into my psyche was a photograph of Sarah Jean Collins, who had been wounded in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963. One of the reasons my response may have been so forceful was that I was pretty much the same age as the girl in that photograph. Fast forward several decades, I just sat bolt upright in bed, and that image came flashing back. So I told myself I needed to go to Birmingham, Alabama. I came to find out that not only had 4 girls been killed that day, but in the violent aftermath of that morning, 2 African-American boys had been killed as well. One of the things I realized was that the visual image of them was something of an abstraction. What does an 11-year-old black girl look like? What does a 14-year-old black girl look like? So I wanted to give those 6 young African Americans a tangible, palpable, physical presence. But still left the work feeling somewhat incomplete. I realized that it didn't engage the issue of time, which is when I decided to also make portraits of African Americans who were the ages that those 6 young people would have been had they not been killed, to give a sense of not only the passage of time, but who or what that young girl or that young boy might have become. So much of my work has dealt with the physical appearance of the black subject, their presence before the camera. I'm trying to take on this challenge of the representation of the black subject that doesn't necessarily depend for their physical presence in the photograph in order for the work to be about the black subject. The most recent project attempts to visualize the movement of fugitive slaves along the path of the Underground Railroad. Their nighttime landscapes meant to suggest what that landscape might have both looked like and felt like from the vantage point of these fugitive black bodies. I'm seeing the space as if through their eyes, looking outward. Using the conceptual idea that comes from Langston Hughes' poem, the last line of which, "This night coming tenderly, black like me." This notion that blackness can be something tender. It doesn't have to be something of intimidation. Blackness through which these fugitive slaves are moving was a space of tender black embrace, moving them towards freedom. Even though they're no longer portraits, they're still very much about the black subject. And taking this sense of visualizing history that began with the Birmingham Project, how to make that memory resonant for the viewer who's standing in front of the photograph. my sense of intentionality, my sense of what matters to me in the world and making my work, is conveyed through the very subjects that I choose to make work about. What I choose to ask people to spend time looking at and thinking about. Whether it's the African American subject, whether it's young people, whether it's getting them to re-engage with a history that they may or may not even know. My work is a way of suggesting that the things that I photograph have value, in the hopes that it reshapes the world one person at a time.